Epilogue. The Pleural shock on the archetype of Weimar laughter. Quoting Thomas Mann's De Zauberberg, I know death. I am an old employee of his. People overestimate him, believe me. I can tell you it's almost nothing. We come out of the dark and go into the dark. In the middle lie events, but beginning and end, birth and death are not experienced by us. They do not have any subjective character. As processes, they fall entirely within the sphere of the objective. And that is how it is with them. This was the Privy Councillor's way of providing solace. To the image of Weimar belong spiritual states that perhaps address sarcasm and the sense of irony, but not the sense of humour. A nation that has just lost a war and 2 million killed in action will not find laughing at all that easy. That one of the first satirical periodicals after the war, a Dada publication, could call itself Der blutige Ernst, bloody earnest, indicates the direction of Weimar humorous culture. In the laughter of this decade, gaiety has to step over dead bodies, and in the end, people will laugh about the thought of corpses to come. When Gustav Regler returned in 1929 to Berlin from a trip to France, he heard this new laughter for the first time, with which the master men of 1933 would come into power. That power through joy laughter that droned out of the fighting egos and heroic prostheses. Regler saw a hunchback who carried in front of his belly a drum, on which he beat and sang, "There once was a communist who didn't know what a Nazi is. He went into a brown house, and without any bones he came out, ha ha ha." There was scarcely any public laughter in these years that would not have been laughter about horrors and against enemies, real or imaginary. It belonged either to the distracted victims who tried to raise themselves with laughter above the threats, or to those who, in the style of this Nazi newspaper seller, laughed at the victims in advance. It was Thomas Mann who, like no one other, perceived the challenge of cynical laughter to humour. Even at the beginning of the Weimar Republic, he tried to penetrate the new zeitgeist at the end of the bourgeois age, and to provide a concept of what it means to live in a modern world and to go with the times, without losing oneself fully in the accommodation to the bad new world. In the rarefied air of the Zauberberg, the Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann settled accounts with the neo-cynical Weimar zeitgeist. This has gone unnoticed by many readers who believe that these Davos conversations in the Heights are nothing other than the last cultivated bourgeois intellectual niceties without any social binding force. In reality, Thomas Mann wrestled with the task of taking up the spirit of accommodation, collaboration and affirmation, which in this century had been irresistibly caught in cynical waters, and of presenting a positive conviction that is not based on the pseudo-sovereign affirmation of deadly matter-of-fact givens. On the Magic Mountain, as if for the last time, images of a humanity flourish, a humanity that remains spiritually alive without becoming cynical. A last positiveness that is hinted at that is still not cynical positivism. It is a humanity that can no longer exist in the quote-unquote low country. The Davos Heights correspond to the psychic zone where the drama of the Magic Mountain is played out. Here, a humorist tries to climb once more, higher than the highest peaks of cynicism, of the latter's breathtaking summits. Anyone can be convinced who, in the speeches of the grand cynic, the Privy Councillor, Behrens, hears the hounds of death howling. It is he who in this rarefied atmosphere leads the way and sets the mood. On the Magic Mountain cynicism reigns, and it is due above all to the inspired convolutions of Mann's prose that this book has not been understood, as explicitly as it should be, as the decisive dispute between two forms of sublation and irony. Here, the older, humorous, ironic tradition wrestles with the irony of the modern "hey, we're alive" syndrome. Instead of the cynical leap into the melee, here an ironist of the old school tries to raise himself above the tumult. He coquettes, to be sure, with the modern throneness, and the cynical, alert, letting oneself be carried along. For the hero of this story too surrenders himself to his adventure on the magic mountain, and lets himself be borne by the current of the rarefied air of the times. But in him arises something that is not merely driven along without any anchor, but a presentiment of what earlier was called Bildung, cultivation, a breath of the higher self, of humanity, and of the affirmation of life in the face of all the debauched temptations towards regression and death. The physiognomy of Weimar laughter was captured by Thomas Mann at least 3 times, and every time it is a laughter that makes itself autonomous and no longer belongs to the one who is laughing. When, as on the mountain of tuberculosis patients, the horrible and the ridiculous come too close to one another, a laughter breaks out for which we are no longer responsible. We do not laugh this way as long as we can assume responsibility for ourselves. We laugh this way when we are suddenly seized by an understanding that reaches more deeply into us than our civilized ego is allowed to acknowledge. The hero of the story, Hans Castorp, newly arrived, laughs this way when his cousin tells him, with the driest of matter-of-factness, how the corpses are brought into the valley in winter by bobsled. Quoting Der Zauberberg, Berlin 1974, pages 10 and 11. "Well, I'll be," cried Hans Castorp, and suddenly he was caught in laughter, in a strong, uncontrollable laughter that shook his breast and distorted his face, which was somewhat stiff from the cool wind, into a quietly aching grimace. "With a bobsled? And you tell me that with complete calm? You have become quite cynical in the last 5 months." "We're not at all cynical," answered Joachim, shrugging his shoulders. "How so? It's all the same to the corpses, and by the way, it could well be that one becomes cynical up here with us. Behrens himself is also an old cynic, an excellent chap on the side, an old core student and brilliant operator, so it seems. You'll like him. And then there's Krokowski, the assistant, a quite clever something. His activity is emphasized in the brochure. He undertakes a dismantling of the soul with the patients." "What does he do? Dismantling of the soul? That's repulsive," cried Hans Castorp. And now his gaiety took the upper hand. He was no longer master of it. After all the rest, the dismantling of souls had taken him over so fully, and he laughed so much that the tears ran down under the hand with which, leaning forward, he covered his eyes. Later, Uncle James Tiernapple, the consul who appears on the Magic Mountain as a visitor, Later, Uncle James Tiernapple, too, the consul who appears on the Magic Mountain as a visitor, will burst out laughing in a similar way when Hans tells him the everyday details of sanatorium life, such as the formation of tubercles, pneumotomies, lung removals, and gangrene of the lungs. He will sense that the human being in this world has lost the capacity to be disturbed about anything at all. The boldest, most horrifying and most apt laughter for the times, however, is the obscene, diabolical shock laughter of Anton Karlovich Ferger. This atrocious laughter, which broke out in him during a lung operation, almost cost him his life. It was a matter of pleural shock, which can occur in such operations. Let us hear Ferger's report of this vulgar, hundsfutisch experience, in which the laughter no longer recognized himself in his laughter. just as if a stranger within him was laughing himself to death. And this long quote from De Zauberberg, pages 374 to 75, ends the epilogue. Here Fergus' good-tempered grey eyes opened wider, and his face became sallow every time he came to speak of the event that for him must have been terrible. Without anaesthetic, gentlemen. Good, our kind cannot bear that. It is forbidden in this case. One understands and finds oneself to be reasonable in the matter. But the local does not go deep, gentlemen. Only the outer flesh is made numb by it. One feels it as one is cut open, admittedly only a pressing and squeezing. I lie with covered face so that I don't see anything, and the assistant holds me on the right side and the matron on the left. It is as if I am being pressed and squeezed. That is the flesh that is opened and pushed back with clamps. But then I hear Herr Hofrat say, "Well then," and at this moment, gentlemen, he begins to tap on the pleura with a blunt instrument. It has to be blunt so that he does not pierce it through prematurely. He palpates it in order to find the right place where he can pierce and let in the gas, and while he is doing this, while he is moving up and down on my pleura with the instrument, gentlemen, then I was done for. It was the end of me. Something indescribable happened to me. The pleura, gentlemen, should not be touched. It should not and does not want to be touched. That is taboo. It is covered with flesh, isolated and unapproachable once and for all. And now he had uncovered it and palpated it. Gentlemen, then I felt sick. Terrible, gentlemen. I never would have thought that such a sevenfold horrible and bitchy, hundsfutisch, mean feeling could exist at all on earth outside of hell. I fell into unconsciousness. Into 3 unconsciousnesses at once. 1 green, 1 brown, and 1 violet. Besides that, it stank in this unconscious. The pleural shock threw itself into my sense of smell, gentlemen. It smelled to high heaven of hydrogen sulfide, as it must smell in hell. And in all this I heard myself laughing, while I was kicking the bucket. But not like a human being laughs, but rather that was the most disgraceful and nauseating laughter I have heard in all my life. For the palpation of the pleura, gentlemen, that is as if one were being tickled in the utmost shameless, most exaggerated and most inhuman way. That's the way it is, not otherwise, with this damned disgrace and torment. And that is the pleural shock that dear God may spare you.